Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell, by myself tonight, so remember that this is your show, and it works better when you use the phone to give me comments or questions to work from. We'll have the number up on the screen. There it is now. That's if you're live on Wednesday night. If you're watching on YouTube or on streaming video on the internet, you can send me an email at the email address shown. I will get back to you rather quickly and may use your comment or question on the next show. So please join in and we'll make it a good one tonight. I want to start out tonight talking a little bit about numbers because I've been looking at some things lately that have kind of surprised me. And the first is in looking at the number of medical marijuana patients there are around the country. The California Medical Marijuana Program is now about 15 years old and was revamped in, I believe, 2004 to set up a better system of distribution. They now claim to have over 350,000 patients enrolled in the program. Now, a lot of people have complained that the California program is too lax, that anybody can get a certificate, that in effect it just has legalized marijuana. So we can look at some of the other states. And some of them now have medical marijuana programs that are over 10 years old. Washington State has over 100,000 enrolled patients to date. And that's without nearly as liberal a program as California has. Even little bitty Montana, a state that only has enough people for one congressman, has over 2,500 patients enrolled with a program that's got quite a few problems that has never really gotten off the ground. Arizona, which just passed a referendum this last November, does not have anything in operation yet, has a very restrictive, tight law, and is writing local regulations that are also quite restrictive, is estimating over 75,000 patients in Arizona. So I started wondering, what do these numbers look like for Texas? Right now we've got about 30 million people. We're not quite as large as California in terms of population, but we are second in the country now. We're much, 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 much larger than Arizona. So even if we assume California's numbers are really quite exaggerated, I don't think there's any way that the number of people in Texas that could benefit from having access to medical marijuana would be less than 100,000 people. And frankly, it could be 2 or 3 times that many. We don't tend to think about it in terms of these great big numbers. But if we look at any of the other states that have adopted it, we see just a surprising number of people that are qualifying to use it. And remember that they do have to go some effort to qualify. They have to find a doctor who's willing to certify they can use it, and they still run the risk of being found in violation of the federal law, even if they're legitimate under state law. So I think that these are really very conservative numbers. The other number I looked at that started me to thinking is an assertion that law enforcement around Texas now is making something over 51,000 marijuana possession arrests each year. Now, one more or less common figure I've seen says that a policeman takes about 3 hours to process a misdemeanor arrest. Stopping the person, doing his investigation, making the arrest, transporting the person to jail, booking the person into jail, writing up the report of what's happened, takes about 3 hours' time, which means that less than 3 arrests amounts to a full day's work by a police officer. If we take 51,000 and divide that by 3, that's 17,000 roughly work days of police patrol. 17,000 days. That's an awful lot of police time. And this year, with every political jurisdiction in the state squeezed for budget money, facing horrible deficits, it sure looks to me like that would be an easy place to drastically save a little bit of money, to take those 17,000 days of police time and move them over from arresting people for possession of marijuana to doing active enforcement of the more serious criminal laws. So it's just something to think about. These are some of the numbers that have been floating around in my head recently. But I've also got a major complaint to make. As I've been looking at what goes on in the other states, and I think I can take here as my 2 primary bad examples of Montana and Michigan. Each of these states passed on a popular referendum vote medical marijuana programs 2 years ago. Now 2 years ago in 2 months. In Michigan in particular, a lot of the cities are still passing ordinances delaying the implementation of medical marijuana so they can have another 6 months to study the issue and come out with regulations. Now, studying the regulations, that may be one thing. But after you have postponed it 6 months, postponed it another 6 months, postponed it another 6 months, postponed it another 6 months, that's enough time to have studied the issue and come up to some resolution. It's clear in all of these states that the people's will has been to make marijuana available to those with medical conditions that would benefit from it. And if that's clearly shown by the state law, then it's the responsibility and the duty of the local governmental officials to find a way to make it happen, not to just keep stalling and hoping it will go away. The same thing applies to a lot of the police forces. Not all of them, but a lot of the police forces And this applies even to states like California with a fairly long history now of medical police forces that say, we don't care what the law says, it's still marijuana and we're still going to arrest people for it. Or those saying, we don't know what to do because if someone shows us a marijuana card, it may not be good. We still don't know if they're violating the law or not. Once again, I think the law has been made pretty clear. The people have said, let the patients have their medical marijuana. It's up to the police to enforce that law as written. And if that means they have to adjust what they consider to be their own version of the priorities, maybe they need to change their minds a little bit. So that's my major rant is it's time for local governments across the country to quit dragging their feet, quit trying to oppose the laws that the people in those states have put into effect. Now, in this, I think I have to give a lot of approval, at least conditionally, to Arizona. Most of the governmental entities from the state level down to the local in Arizona have been vehemently opposed to medical marijuana ever since the idea first came up. But I must say that once the initiative passed this last November, pretty much everything from the state level to the local level has gotten on board, and it looks like they're going to have regulations in place in time for the act to go into effect at the date guaranteed by the law. Let's take a break, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
What was the fire baptism as discussed by John the Baptist? What was the importance of the fire baptism? Is it currently illegal to perform the fire baptism? Is the holy oil described in Exodus illegal to manufacture today?
It is currently illegal to conduct the fire baptism of Jesus Christ.
In the earliest translations, from the Hebrew into the Greek, in the Septuagint, it was mistranslated as calamus, and then subsequent translations ever since then have not gone back to the Hebrew, but have gone, in fact, to the Greek and have propagated this misconception that calamus is the plant that was used in this anointing oil of the priest.
That this is the seal of the gift of the Holy Spirit, and for us that means that the Holy Spirit, which has been already granted in some form during the baptism, is now sealed. And that means that this person has the right and the responsibility to move forward as a Christian for the rest of his life.
In the tabernacle, where you spoke with God, everything was anointed with this oil, which contained cannabis amongst other things. And in the ordination of the priest was anointed with the oil.
In Exodus 30:23, God commands Moses to make a holy anointing oil with anywhere from 6 to 9 pounds of cannabis mixed into about 6 liters of olive oil, along with myrrh, cinnamon, some other spices. And every time that Moses is to talk to God, he's to cover himself in this anointing oil, place some of this anointing oil on the incense altar with the incense.
Of course, there is the clear relationship between the word chrism itself and Christ, both meaning one who is anointed. And the follower of Christ is united with Christ in a very deep and profound way. And we definitely understand this charismation to be an important feature of that being united with Christ.
Good evening. You're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics on Houston Media Source.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I'm Buford Terrell, your host, doing a bit of a solo shtick tonight, so please call with any questions or comments that you have. Tonight's book to talk about is The Pot Book, A Complete Guide to Cannabis, edited by Dr. Julia Holland. Now, Dr. Holland is a psychiatrist. She specializes in psychopharmacology. She's on the faculty of New York University Medical School, one of the real experts in the area. I first ran into her about 10 years ago when she published her first book, The Ecstasy Guide, which was the same sort of compilation about MDMA. Now, this particular book is a collection of over 40 essays on the science, the medicine, the social use, harm reduction, the law, almost every aspect of using marijuana that you can think of. And of course, anytime you've got a compilation book like this, it's going to vary in quality. Most of these I would rate from very, very good to outstanding. My only hesitancy there is 2 essays claiming to be about the history of marijuana are done from extremely limited biased viewpoints by people with special agendas they want to sell. They ignore almost all of the basic history of the plant. I would rely upon them very, very reluctantly. But except for those 2 essays, almost everything else in here is solid, quite reliable. In fact, some of the essays on the science of cannabis may have way more in them than you really want to know. But all in all, this is an outstanding book just for an overall education, everything from the variations in state law around the country to the risks of using marijuana and the benefits to some of the efforts to reform the laws around the country. It's an education in itself and a pretty good reference to have on your shelf. And one other nice thing about it, it's set up so that any profits that accrue through the sale of this book are donated for research on cannabis. So this is a place where if you buy the book, you're actually helping out carry on research on the subject. I might say that Dr. Holland also has a third book out that I ran into somewhat by accident called Weekends at Bellevue. And as she was starting her practice out, for 10 years, she was the head psychiatrist on the night shift on weekends in the Bellevue Hospital emergency room in New York City. And some of you may know that Bellevue, which was in fact the closest hospital to the 9/11 tragedy, is the most active emergency room in the city of New York and probably in the whole country. So her 10 years of memoirs in Bellevue made a fun read. This one's a little more serious. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Okay, hi. Dr. Holland is in the new marijuana special that is going to be on National Geographic Channel this Sunday night.
Oh, great. Do you know what time it's on?
It seems like it's on 8 o'clock Central, but I can't be for sure, and I'm sure it's going to be repeated.
Okay.
And then also she has extra additional chapters that she hasn't put in the book that are on the potbook.com website.
Yes.
And those are also really good. So that's additional things that people can check on.
Well, thank you for that information.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you. That website is thepotbook.com, and I've looked at some of those chapters. They do expand upon what's in the book and provide some alternatives, and it's also got a means for you to communicate with her as well. So it's a very useful, handy, and informative book. And that was the National Geographic Channel this coming Sunday, and she said she thought it was 8 p.m. to be sure and check your listings. So I figure that's one I probably need to see as well. You know, it's interesting the way that television has picked up on marijuana in the past, really just a couple of years. And here I'm not talking about as much on the entertainment side, but CNBC, the business news channel, has done at least 2 separate specials on marijuana, particularly the business aspect side of it. There have been 2 or 3 other documentary programs scattered around. It's starting to attract some attention other than just in terms of the stoner comedies that we all see. So I think there's a lot of things that are opening up in this area. One little strange historical fact I ran onto this week for those of you that enjoy the strange and quirky. It seems that when the archaeologists excavated one of the oldest Viking ships that they have found, the Oseberg ship that dates to a little after 800 AD, in excavating the ship, they found 4 cannabis seeds. Now, I have to qualify that and say that doesn't mean the Vikings ran around stoned. Remember, cannabis sativa also comes in the variation that's used to make hemp, and the variations used to make hemp don't contain enough THC to get people high. And people have been growing hemp in Europe for at least 2,000 years. So it's likely all that the cannabis seeds on the Viking ship meant was that the Vikings had ropes. But at least you can argue that they knew what the substance was. Excuse me. It's time for us to take another break, so I'll see you in a few minutes.
Have come to this event, KushCon, making it the largest event of its kind in the history of the planet, which is really significant. I've got to tell you, I advocate legalizing marijuana. Control it, regulate it, tax it. I think that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related, and that's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but that ought to be the focus. And when you talk about legalizing marijuana, I think it's important to point out it's never going to be legal to smoke pot, become impaired, get behind the wheel of a car, or do harm to others. It's never going to be legal for kids to smoke pot or to buy pot. And under which scenario is it going to be easier for kids to buy pot? The condition that exists today, where not only can you buy pot virtually anywhere, but in a situation today where also harder drugs are made available simply because the person that sells marijuana also sells other drugs. Take that away, have to produce an ID to be able to go and buy marijuana. I think you can make the case that a lot fewer kids would be using marijuana. And is that really the concern anyway? Isn't the real concern about death, disease, crime, corruption, the things that we really care about? When it comes to all the other drugs, I advocate harm reduction strategies, which is just that, the notion of reducing death, disease, crime, corruption, the things that we really care about. In a nutshell, looking at the drug problem as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I have to tell you that I have been traveling the country over the last year. I am a Republican, reaching out to Republican groups all around the country, looking to expand the base of the Republican Party to recognize what this issue is and what it represents. And what it represents from a dollars and cents standpoint is that half of what we spend on law enforcement, the courts, and the prisons is drug related. This is huge, $70 billion a year. And what are we getting for that $70 billion a year? We're arresting 1.8 million people. I always point out that is the population of New Mexico that gets arrested in this country every single year. And with those arrests go the fact that there are now 2.3 million people behind bars in this country. We have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. The majority of those 2.3 million people behind bars are there because they've sold drugs. And arguably, not arguably, non-violent crime are they behind bars. I estimate there are 30 million Americans that, but for our drug laws, would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. So we're at a tipping point in this country, and that tipping point is actually 2 years away. Right now, 46% of Americans support legalizing marijuana. This is really significant, and it's a great issue when brought to the light of day, and hence kudos to the Kush Conference, because what this is going to do is it's going to continue to increase the awareness around this issue. When Proposition 19 came up for a vote this last fall, you know, it came right down on the national average when it came to the vote. But the issue was put on the dinner table as a topic of discussion for millions of American families that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And again, this is an issue, when light shone on this issue advances. That 46% that supports legalizing marijuana, depending on how the wind blows, they don't move to 45 or 44 or 42 tomorrow. It's moving forward, and it's been moving forward, again, 2 years away from that. I really want to applaud all of you for your activism in this area. If there's one single thing that we can do in this country to improve our quality of life, it would be to legalize marijuana. Imagine police tomorrow going out and enforcing real crime as opposed to going out and catching people selling small amounts of drugs, and they do a really good job of that. Imagine right now any of you going back to your car and having it burglarized while you're here in this conference. Number one, would you call the police? The only reason you'd call the police is for an insurance report. That's the only reason. But in a scenario where marijuana was legal, and the only reason just make a police report is because they don't have the resources to go out and enforce the crime against, enforce laws against real crime. And again, real crime is the burglarization of our homes and what have you. And what's the root cause of burglarization of the home? Well, perhaps it's somebody who has to pay for drugs. Anyway, legalize marijuana, adopt rational drug policy regarding all other drugs, and law enforcement, again, concentrates on real crime committed against you and I. This will make a huge difference in the quality of life for all of us. And again, I just applaud you on your activism. Keep it up. We are 2 years away from this happening, but it's the final stretch, and more than ever, it's a need to go out and engage in conversation, discussion, debate with people that don't understand this issue. Thank you very much. Other policymakers agreeing with me in public or private? In public, none. In private, probably about 30%. 5 years ago, I found myself with a burst fracture of my 12th T vertebrae, which is the pivotal vertebrae in your back. So I broke my back. I broke 6 ribs. I had meniscus damage in both knees. I tore my ACL, and outside of those injuries, I had my neck and my shoulders and my hips. It took me 3 years to recover from that accident, but I found myself in a situation where I did not want to take prescription drugs for what was ailing me, because I've done that before for a very short amount of time, and I thought that it was horrible, I thought it was dangerous, and I did not want to subject myself to that. So I found myself laying on the floor for what was a diagnosis of being on the floor for 6 straight weeks, having to eat on the floor, not being able to get up other than just to go to the bathroom. And a friend came by and said, Gary, do you want me to see if I could get you some marijuana? And yes, absolutely, that would be great. And so for 3 years, I smoked pot to deal with this situation, and I will tell you, doctors were telling me that I was not going to recover from this, that this was the end of my athletics, the end of my activism, and I'm not going to attribute this to marijuana, but I'm fully recovered. It took me 3 years to do it, and marijuana played a role in all this to help me through that.
You're watching the Drug, Crime, and Politics show. I need less business. Help change the laws. Fewer people locked up for this foolishness will help all of us.
Those recordings of Governor Johnson were done by Dean Becker, and Dean is on the phone now to give us his report from the Drug Tooth Network. Hello, Dean.
Hey, Buford, how you doing? I had a great time there at KushCon. Governor Johnson couldn't have been more open, more embracing, if you will, of the idea of drug reform. He speaks, of course, he heard of the need to legalize marijuana and control the rest. I forget his exact phrase, but he wants to end the madness, which is what I think more and more folks are beginning to realize, that it is madness to continue down this same path, is it not?
Yes.
I wanted to tell you, I got a great guest lined up for this coming Sunday on the Century of Lies show. Her name is Pam Constable, and she's a writer for the Washington Post, and she's actually in Afghanistan, leaving for Pakistan tomorrow, and then headed back to the United States, and we'll have her on air this coming Sunday evening.
And she can report on the poppy fields.
Report on the poppy fields and the corruption and the election that's in suspension to this point, and all the all the hysteria and hoopla about winning this war, finding Osama bin Laden, all this now 10-year-old effort. It's just going nowhere, wasting vast quantities of our treasury.
Yeah.
But at 6:30, we're going to have Mr. Brendan Kiley. He's a reporter based out of Seattle, and he's going to be talking about the overall just failure of this drug war, a particular focus on the cocaine trade, the contaminants contained therein, like the levamisole.
Right.
Cancer-causing dog dewormer.
Yes.
And he's been trying to determine why is it in the cocaine? You know, it's they could cut it with most anything. Used to be a few years back that they tried to make it as pure as possible, usually some 92%. But he's saying that a large quantity of America's cocaine now, I think it's 30 to 40%, has this levamisole in it. And it's not being put in after it crosses the border. It's being put in as they make it in Colombia and Bolivia.
Well, would you care to run purity tests on any of the alcohol sold in Chicago in 1920? It's the same principle.
Isn't it though? Yeah. How many people died of bathtub gin and you know, unfiltered beer and who knows what all they were putting out and calling it alcohol?
Yeah.
It's Oh, and then one other thing. We're going to have Mr. Terry Nelson. He's the gentleman, he's now spent 33 years working for the U.S. government as Customs, Border, Air Interdiction Officer, worked in Central South America, Caribbean, Mexico, all over the place. And he just finished up another tour of duty in Iraq. He was over there teaching their Border Patrol how to contain, keep Iran out of their territory, I suppose. But he's now back on track. He's in the States. I think he's going to stay a while, and he's going to file his first report in quite some time, talking about this drug war. And I think the stories today, I was looking at the Houston Chronicle, front page, 4 stories dealing with this drug war, the futility of it, and so forth.
Yes.
It's just becoming such a huge issue that eventually I think the American people are going to have to notice it and demand that something change. What do you think?
I think that you're absolutely right there. And I think that more and more people are realizing that it's just not working.
No, not working at all. One of the stories that caught my attention today on the Chronicle dealt with the top 5 legal drugs that children are doing now. One of them is some sort of bath salt that they're snorting, trying to get a cocaine or a methamphetamine type effect, I suppose.
Yeah.
And another crazy one, people are pouring vodka on their eyeballs. For God's sake, I do not understand this, I mean...
That one I can't see where, other than red eyes and a burning sensation.
Hey, can you get high through your eyeballs? I don't know. But it sounds just horrible. But, this is kids, this is propaganda, it's rumor, it's... and I think just the sort of thing that would entice more children to at least give it a try.
Well, it was pointed out to me probably 30 years ago that if you look at little bitty kids playing, every little kid I've ever seen loves to close their eyes and spin around in circles until they get so dizzy they can't stand up.
Looking for that additional...
And that's nothing but getting high.
Yeah, we've all seen it 1,000 times, sure. That's it's what they do when the parents are talking, they're trying to leave the house, the kids will start spinning around. They're doing something to break the monotony. Well, if you'll allow me, I'd like to say this, that, that event at KushCon, I've talked about it before, but the fact of the matter is 300,000 square feet, 450 vendors, and every kind of endeavor dealing with the marijuana trade you can think of, everything from insurance to part-time help to machines that shake the hash off the pot and other machines that chop the leaves off, and 47 kinds of pipes and vaporizers, you name it, and all very openly, very well accepted. I asked one of the policemen, who was patrolling the event, I said, well, what's been your reaction? He says, just like any other convention.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that shows the lie about marijuana.
Well, I think one of the indicators this last year, there have been major cover letter articles about the business of cannabis.
Indeed.
In Forbes, in Fortune, in Mother Jones.
I just got a copy today of one from there.
Yeah.
Talking about it, the biggest supplier of, not seeds, but lights and all the various accoutrements needed for growing pot out in California.
Yeah. Well, we're worried about not enough jobs in this country. why not open it up so that there's more people growing some good weed?
It sure makes a lot of sense. A little bit of tax money coming in and a lot less money going out.
No, not a little bit of tax money, Dean. I got to playing around with my little calculator and taking very, very, very conservative figures. If we were to legalize just medical marijuana in Texas and apply just our normal sales tax to it, do you know how much additional revenue that would mean to the state each year?
I'm sure it's significant, but I don't know, sir.
About $200 million a year in sales tax.
Holy crap. Now that's some money. They were announcing today they're shutting down 30% of the funding for the border.
Yeah.
Because they can't afford it.
Yeah.
They're
cutting out preschool programs.
And the $200 million you just mentioned would more than cover that deficit that they're encountering, and work well towards maintaining health care, which was also getting a huge chunk knocked out of it. Education, more students per classroom.
Well, as I say, I picked my numbers so that that's an extreme lowball number at that. And that's every year, each year as it goes on and on.
Well,
so
it's an exercise in futility. I like the phrase I like to use these days. We keep pitching our treasury into the drug war wishing well.
I like that, Dean.
Well, if you allow, I'd like to tell folks where they could learn more about the Drug Truth Network. You can go to my website, which is drugtruth.net. You can listen here in Houston on KPFT, which is 90.1 FM, and the shows again air on Sunday nights, 6:30 to 7:30. And it should be a great interview with with Miss Pam Constable from the Washington Post.
Okay, we look forward to it, and thank you, Dean.
Thank you all. Good night.
There was one of those newspaper stories that Dean referred to that struck me as kind of funny. Actually, I think I saw this one on the local news today. Fire broke out in a house. The fire department went rushing to respond to the fire. When they got there, the house was surrounded by a big wrought iron fence. As the fire trucks drove up, some men inside that fence locked the gates. 3 men were spraying the house, the roof of the house where it was burning, with garden hoses. They kept yelling at the firemen, "You all go back, we don't need you, we've got it under control." The firemen broke in, they put the fire out, and as they were putting the fire out and examining it, they found a rather large marijuana grow operation in the attic of the house. So I would say that you need to be careful with your lights and your electricity, because the fire department's not going to believe you when you say, "We don't need any help." And I might also give another story from this week. Those of you that rely upon prescription painkillers may notice the next time you refill your prescription that the box or bottle bears a new black box warning on it telling you that the drugs inside are dangerous. So a black box warning on the label is the most drastic safety warning that the FDA can order a manufacturer to use, and they're ordering it applied to several drugs. And it's not because the opiates in Vicodin are dangerous. They're really not. They may, in a few cases, lead to habituation, but they're not dangerous. The part of these compounds that's dangerous is the acetaminophen. If we take hydrocodone by itself, It's a Schedule 2, which is highly restricted. You mix acetaminophen or Tylenol with it. That makes it Percocet, and a much less restricted Schedule 3. The acetaminophen is supposed to make it safer, but it's the acetaminophen that requires, starting now, the black box warning, because acetaminophen causes liver damage. It causes large numbers of deaths each year from overdose, and what's worse, when combined with alcohol, it causes even more deaths. So the irony is that Vicodin and Percocet now have warnings that they're dangerous drugs, not because they're opiates, but because they contain acetaminophen. Let's take another break, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
This is Dean Becker of the Drug Truth Network. I urge you to listen to our programs on KPFT Radio, that's 90.1 FM in Houston, and available on the net at drugtruth.net. And the reasons why: there is no truth, no justice, no logic, no scientific fact, no moral clarity, no reason whatsoever for this drug war to continue. And it's going to take your involvement, and I urge you to become part of that solution.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson from NORML. For 30 years, NORML has provided a voice for the millions of Americans who smoke marijuana responsibly. More than 500,000 Americans are arrested each year for smoking pot. These are ordinary citizens like you and me, whose lives and careers are being needlessly destroyed. To learn how you can help, contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORML.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. The Drug Policy Forum of Texas will have its annual meeting this coming Thursday in Houston at 7 o'clock at the Cafe Express on West Gray. So we would like to see some of you there. We had, at the last break, the taping of parts of Governor Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico's talk at the KushCon conference recently, and he was advocating legalization of marijuana. And frankly, I have wondered for some time why it is that there are not more Republicans coming out strongly in favor of legalizing marijuana. After all, the Republicans are the ones these days shouting most loudly for smaller government. We could get rid of about $40 billion a year across the country by doing away with the war against drugs. They are the ones yelling in favor of greater personal liberties and freedoms and telling people they cannot use marijuana is certainly an infringement on personal freedom. So it just strikes me as strange why so much of the opposition to relaxing the laws against marijuana comes from the Republican parties, which seems to me would be a group of people strongly in favor of getting this branch of the government off of people's backs. An amusing little side note there. The new governor of New Mexico that just took office is Republican. The previous governor, a Democrat, was instrumental in passing New Mexico's medical marijuana statute. The new Republican governor campaigned on a promise that if she was elected, she would repeal New Mexico's medical marijuana law. The first week after she was inaugurated in office, she said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to get around to it. We've got so many problems. We've got so much budget problems that, we're just not going to have time to mess with that. So we're going to let it alone and not repeal it. So for at least a little while, medical marijuana users in New Mexico can relax. You're safe for a little while. And frankly, I think you're probably safe anyway. I don't know of any state so far that has adopted a medical marijuana law that has gone back and retracted it and said it just doesn't work. It just seems that more and more and more keep adopting it, adding to the list. The number just keeps growing. Pretty soon it may even get to the point where Congress recognizes what's going on. And I think that really, even though at first it didn't sound like it, this may be an opportune time to apply some pressure in Austin. But the way to do it is not by appealing to the hearts of the legislature. I'm not sure they have any of those. It's not by appealing to their brains. I'm damn certain that there aren't any of those in Austin. But perhaps we can appeal to their greed. They're looking at such a budgetary crisis this year. They are faced with a desperate need to find money to close the budgetary gap, that almost anything that will help out in closing the budget is going to get some attention. And I mentioned three things tonight that come into play here. The first is, if we quit arresting people for possessing marijuana, then that frees up an awful lot of police time to use for other purposes, and it at least would slow down the number of new police officers cities have to hire, even if it doesn't cut down on the number they're currently employing. Along the same line, each one of those 51,000 marijuana arrests each year would involve, at a minimum, an overnight stay in jail. It costs a county, on an average, at least $25 per person per night to keep them in jail. You don't have to be able to do much arithmetic to figure out the savings there. The second thing I mentioned was the sales tax that could be generated from allowing medical marijuana to be distributed to qualified patients just at our existing sales tax rate. And there's a third one that Dean brought up with his discussion of the Kush conference. If medical marijuana were approved, everyone providing medical marijuana is going to grow it. If they're going indoors, they're going to need lights, nutrients, fertilizers, pots or beds. They're going to need employees to take care of the plants, to harvest them, prepare the finished product for distribution. If they're distributing it to patients, they're going to need to buy or lease property to run their business. They're going to need clerical and service personnel to run the business. They're going to need insurance. They're going to need accountants. They're going to need lawyers. They may even, as we're seeing in some places, need advertising agencies. We have even found that in many of the states, a whole new profession has opened up of schools teaching people how to grow marijuana and run dispensaries. All of these new jobs put people back to work in our communities. They increase the amount of money in the communities, and they generate additional taxes to help pay for it. So at a time when we're desperately looking for ways to kickstart the economy, handle a crippled state budget, this to me looks like a great way to go. Hello, caller, you're on the air and it needs to be pretty quick.
How you doing?
Pretty good. We don't have much time, so can you give us your question?
I just want to say, I agree with everything you're saying. I feel like if they went ahead and did the medical marijuana law and let it pass, that it'll be less problems, It'll
That's
be
right.
less situations. Yeah. Because I don't think not only that marijuana use is a bad thing, I think you can make it a bad thing just like drinking.
Yes. It's
no different. So okay. I just, I'm kind of listening to you and agreeing with some of the things you're saying. You're kind of wise. And I just wanted to call in and get my comment.
Okay, thank you, sir. And remember, though, agreeing with me is not enough. I can't do anything about it. The one you need to tell this to are your elected representatives. So write them, call them, go visit them in their local offices, but make sure that your local representatives know how you feel about this subject and why you think it's important and that you expect them to act. And it's up to us acting together to get it done. So let's all move forward and make it happen.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories in you.
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. The end of prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods,